Hi, this is Anne Marie Gaddy from Classic Movie Hub, and I'm here today with co-host Aurora from Once Upon a Screen, and we are both thrilled to be here today for a chat with Victoria Riskin. Victoria is the daughter of Fay Wray. Yes, that would be King Kong's Fay Wray, as well as the daughter of the Academy Award-winning screenwriter Robert Riskin, who's penned some of the most beloved classics. It Happened One Night, Meet John Doe, Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, You Can't Take It With You, Lost Horizon, Platinum Blonde. I could go on. Before we start, I just want to mention that Victoria's book, Fay Wray and Robert Riskin, A Hollywood Memoir, is now on paperback. And I just want to thank you, Victoria, for being here with us. And I guess before we start, would you mind holding up your wonderful book so that our fans can see it? I will say it was such an interesting and fun read, so they really need to
Just
see this.
hold it up. Maybe you can see the photograph of my parents. This is different than the hardback cover, and I was so happy to be able to get them together on the cover, sitting having dinner at the Stork Club in New York when they were just married. So it's perfect for Valentine's Day.
It is. It
Did
is.
I mention to
Yeah.
you? Oh, you probably are interested in knowing that it was nominated for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize for Best Biography last year. I don't know if I mentioned that to you. Maybe I shouldn't tell you that.
Well, congratulations.
I think that's fair game. So congratulations. And I guess with that, we'll get started. So there were so many things I loved about your book. It's just fun, interesting facts. But you know, it's really a dual biography. So you had the daunting task of taking these two very famous people who happen to be your parents and writing a biography. So my first question is, well, you know, why did you decide to write this, and how did you go about it?
So it was kind of an accidental book. I had been writing and producing in Hollywood, and I moved to Santa Barbara, a beautiful town, and kind of left the producing world. And I joined a memoir writing group, and I was writing down little vignettes of my childhood or memories of events. And I piled up about 250 pages. Um, and then I gave it to a couple of people, and they said, I love what you've written, but I want to know more about your parents. They're really interesting people. And I thought, you know what? I do too. I want to know more about them. And so I took a deep dive, and I just couldn't get enough of the research and reading everything I could get my hands on about the time they lived in, the people they knew, the what was going on in the Hollywood studio system, their letters, memos, manuscripts, and so on. Uh, it was a, I think it was a kind of delicious experience, and maybe it's a little bit what people go through as they get older in life. They want to know where did I come from, and who are these people who are part of my lineage. And I found really two really interesting people, and they happen to be my parents.
Yeah, that's great. What did you learn about them as you were doing your research? Something that surprised you, maybe.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I think as children, when we're growing up, your parents are either on a pedestal or you're frustrated with them and you don't really see them very clearly. So, first of all, I began to know them as human beings, as people. I think with my mother, who always seemed to have a very clear compass about who she was, and a certain kind of charm and almost dignity, a sense of humor, all those things. She was quite wonderful. But I never really thought about the resilience that she had, what what she went through, which was a lot of challenging crossroads in her life, and how she handled. She had a sense of destiny. Her own. I think both my parents had a sense of having a special destiny, not in an egomaniacal way, but just that better things were out there for them, and they had a very straight arrow. But she had to handle very difficult things, a difficult marriage, difficult growing up, and I grew to just be rather in awe of how she managed. Uh, With my father, I think I just fell in love with him all over again. I don't know if that's 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 how it was. I fell in love with him again. So yeah.
Yeah, that's lovely. I love that. I imagine your home was filled with famous people. Did you realize as a child that they were famous?
Yeah, I kind of did. I don't know at what point exactly. Maybe it was kindergarten, when you in Hollywood in Los Angeles in those days. Yeah, in fact, I think I remember this, although you never know if you've invented it. But I just remember in school, maybe as early as kindergarten, kids saying, "Are your parents in the business?" Right? And they didn't mean the oil business or the airplane manufacturing business, both of which were big in Los Angeles. They meant the motion picture business. And you were part of a very special club. And I think the people who came to our house, I didn't think of them as movie stars. I don't think I had that consciousness, but they certainly were wonderful to watch. They were glamorous, smart, funny,
Right.
playful. I didn't know that all children didn't grow up in that environment, but the parties that they had for kids, were even by today's standards, pretty extravagant and wonderful. And it was just a big playland.
No, that's great. I didn't grow up like that, just in case you're wondering.
Yeah, I don't think I did either. I can only imagine what it would be like your next door neighbors having a barbecue, but they're, your family are stars, the next door neighbors are
Yeah.
stars.
Well,
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, our next door neighbor was Charles Brackett, who wrote Sunset Boulevard and was Billy Wilder's partner. So we would go through the fence. It was a hedge. There was a little fence, and he had marvelous parties with his famous Easter parties where he would have presents for all the children and hide eggs everywhere, and the mimosas were pouring freely, and there was a kind of almost competition in Hollywood who could have the best party. It didn't mean necessarily the most expensive, but it certainly meant the most fun and imaginative.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That is really cool. Gosh, I can only imagine. Sorry, I'm going back and forth because I'm watching the chat too. I'm just keeping an eye on the chat to see if anything's coming in. But it's really great because people are asking about the book, so that's so exciting. It's a really wonderful book. So I
Oh,
want to.
is it okay to say that it was nominated as best biography by the LA Times Book Festival?
I think that's
I think
very
so.
Somebody has to say that. I don't know.
Congratulations.
Say that again, Victoria.
No, really, it is a great, great entertaining read,
Wonderful book.
to fascinating people, really.
And I just, again, I encourage people to read it because it actually was not only about your mom, not only about your dad, not only about their love story and their careers, but there was a lot of context in there about what was going on in Hollywood at the time. I thought that was terrific. But I'm gonna go back a little bit. I think we're gonna talk about your mom for a little bit. And I actually did not know much about your mom's life until I read the book. So I thought it was very interesting. Your mom really, she didn't really have an easy childhood. She grew up in poverty, but by the time she was 18, she was the financial support for the family. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about her early days in Hollywood and how that all happened and evolved.
Well, she came to Hollywood, as you may remember from the book, in the care of a young man who was 21 years old, sort of engaged to her sister, who was a photographer, and he thought he could get her into the movies. Now, you have to ask yourself, how is it that her mother even allowed her to get on the train alone with a 21-year-old young man and go to Hollywood? And the only way I can kind of understand that is that there were 6 children in the household and not enough food. And also her mother had a little sense of glamour and possibilities, and so she sent Fay off. So he looked after her, put her in the care of a family, and then would come and pick her up after school and try to help get her a little part. She got a little part eventually, and her mother came chasing to Los Angeles to rescue me. I mean, I think one day she woke up and said, "How could I have done that?" And so she packed up all her kids and came to Hollywood. So my mother had one little part, and she decided when she was 17 that she would go to Roach Studios and say, "I want to come to work." And they said, "Okay." And that was it. That was the big casting session. So she began to do these two real comedies. I don't know if you would enjoy seeing this, but here's her timesheet. This is her timesheet from the Hal Roach Studios.
Oh,
Every day,
wow.
that she worked every day. She made $60 a week and then was given a big raise to $75 a week. Now, $75 a week is probably in today's money like $1,000 a week. So that was big money for a family that had nothing. And so they could get a little house, rent a house, and my mother could buy a car and drive herself to work. And she did these little comedies, and most of them are gone, but I've seen a few of them. And she's absolutely captivating on film. Your eye goes to her, even if she's the brunt of a joke or she's just little part, has a little tiny part, but your eye always goes to her. She has presence, and
Yeah.
that's true for all of those fabulous women of the 1930s and 40s. When the camera turned on them, something happened that was just kind of magical.
Yeah. Fay became famous with Eric von Stroheim's The Wedding March in 1928. And I was surprised when I looked at her filmography. I mean, she made a lot of movies between that and King Kong, her most famous.
I think that, first of all, it's the heart of the Depression when she's making these films. By the time she made King Kong, it's 1933. In the year 1933 and 1934, she starred in 20 films, almost
Yeah.
one a month.
Yeah.
And when she made King Kong, she was making The Most Dangerous Game at the same time. And actually, they were using some of the same set. So she would run from the morning working on Kong to the other side of the set to do some of the scenes for The Most Dangerous Game. You have to imagine Hollywood in those days was filled with very scrappy people, imagination, ingenuity, working with not enough money to get anything done, but having a great time for the most part.
Yeah. Aside from doing that, running between these two movies, The Most Dangerous Game is another one of my favorites. I mean, filming Kong was very, very difficult. Can you talk a little bit about her experience making that movie?
Yeah, well, physically it was very demanding. Now you have to understand that she had already made a film with Marion C. Cooper, who and Ernest B. Schoedsack, who were the creators of King Kong, and so she loved them. They were great guys. Cooper was this little feisty, charming Southern guy who had been an ace pilot in World War I, and so had been Ernest B. Schoedsack, and they had been traveling around the world and making these adventure documentaries. So when they settled down and got married, King Kong is kind of an autobiography, in a sense, of these two guys. So their motto in life was make it difficult, distant, and dangerous. Well, they took out the distant and they settled back in Hollywood.
Yeah.
But difficult and dangerous was just part of their motto. And so there was a time when they would cinch Fay into this big hand that they had that was the Kong hand, and then lift her up on a crane 30 feet in the air. And then her job was to, scream and wiggle. And I always thought, well, why is she trying to get loose from Kong? She's going to fall a zillion feet. But in the middle of filming, the cinch became loosened and she's 30 feet up in the air and terrified. She is clinging for dear life. she's yelling, "Let me down," and they're saying, "Great, doing a good job, more Fay,"
Oh my gosh.
And another time they had her working, Cooper came home and said to his wife, he was very proud of himself. "I got Fay to work for 24 hours straight." And his wife said, "You ever do that again and I'm leaving you. You can't treat your actors that way."
Wow.
But she didn't mind. She was very athletic and very, she was never difficult. I don't think anyone ever would have accused her of being difficult. So she just loved the action of it.
Great stories.
Yeah. And, one of the things I loved about the book, of course, we get your point of view. And you told a story when you were 9. You saw King Kong for the first time. And I just thought it was such a charming story. Would you mind telling us what your reaction was?
So yeah, for quite some time, my mother didn't want me to see King Kong but now I was 9 years old, and she said, "Do you think you're old enough to see it?" And I couldn't even believe she would question my majority. And see it. So she set me in front of the television set. In those days, television sets were consoles, big consoles, with a little screen in the middle, and they sat on the carpet. And so I curled up and started to watch it. And she would come through the room to see if I was okay. Was I scared? Just being motherly, and on her way allegedly to the kitchen and back. By the end of the film, I was sobbing. I was absolutely sobbing as it ended. And she said, "Oh my gosh, were you scared that your mother was, that I was in jeopardy?" And I said, "No, you were so mean to King Kong and he died." I was just devastated when he died. And I kind of couldn't talk to her for a couple of days because I felt she was part of the conspiracy. Anyway, that had led to his death. And in some ways, that's the genius of the film, because you care about the
Absolutely.
Kong, and you feel compassion for him in the end. He was just being himself.
That's right. Yeah, you did get it. You got to the heart of the movie at age 9. That's great. Aside from Kong, I mean, I mentioned I love, the Most Dangerous Game. I love Mystery of the Wax Museum. Do you have a favorite of her movies?
Well, apart from The Wedding March, which I really loved, it's sort of a masterpiece, a silent film. There's a little film called The Affairs of Cellini, and it's somewhere between a swashbuckler kind of film, tongue-in-cheek, and a French farce. And it's with, you remember Frank Morgan from The Wizard of Oz?
Sure.
So he plays this sort of lecherous, stupid duke who is trying to seduce her, and she's too stupid to really understand that. And Frederick March is the Errol Flynn kind of character who's trying to also seduce her. And she plays this bimbo, and I just loved it because she was so smart and so elegant. And for her to play in a comedy it was Gregory LaCava who directed it.
And with Freddie March, wow.
With Frederick March, it's this wonderful little film, and there's this cute little moment where you can imagine Frank Morgan. It's sort of like he was always the Wizard of Oz, right?
Yeah.
But he's saying to her, he starts to touch her hand, and she says, "Why are you doing that?" And he says, "Well," he's trying to, charm her. She says, "Why are you doing that, my lord?" And he says, "Oh, now that we're friends, just call me Bumpy." And she looks at him oddly, and she says, "Well, my lord, I can't call you Bumpy with all the servants standing around." And he said, "That's all right. I've had their ears cut off, and I don't know why."
Good.
"Oh, okay, Bumpy." And he makes her repeat it, "Bumpy." Silly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I have to see that.
Yeah. Okay.
I will say we're getting a number of questions, but I think we're going to maybe do them at the end so that we don't get off track here. But there's some really fun and good questions coming in. But I'm going to be selfish now. Okay. Everybody knows, well, anybody who's a classic movie hub fan knows I'm a huge fan of the Marx Brothers. So Victoria, once again, going back to your childhood, I understand you met Harpo Marx. So
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we had, in the olden days in our house, we had a movie projector, and we only had a couple of movies, and one of them was, I think, A Night at the Opera, right? And I just fell in love with Harpo Marx. I mean, all the Marx brothers were great, but he was just my most favorite Marx brother.
Me too.
Yeah, with the horn and the trench coat and the so we would play, and whenever it rained, we would play that. And so I had seen it already when I was 7 years old, many times. And so one night my parents are having a dinner party, and this very elegant gentleman walks in with a lovely suit and a hanky in his jacket pocket, and he looks like just a distinguished gentleman. And my mother said, "Sweetheart, this is Harpo Marx, the man you love so much in the movies." And I said, "He is not. I thought she was playing a terrible trick on me to try to convince me that this, anyway. He was very gracious and lovely, but he asked if I could sit on his lap, and I didn't want to because he was an imposter.
Yeah, I get that. I really enjoyed learning from your book that your mom really enjoyed Hollywood, her life in Hollywood, her career. She was very open, to fans, to interviews and things. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's rare, really. You don't hear many of those stories.
Sometimes, I mean, first of all, there were a lot of extraordinarily talented and good people in Hollywood. There were scoundrels. I'm not whitewashing old Hollywood, but she had a tendency not only to see the best in people, but to bring out the best in people. And so it was like a big family, and she felt cared for. I mean, it was very hard for her when, for example, her first contract was with Paramount, and when that contract ended, as they had to close down their theaters and they were facing bankruptcy, it was a big loss. So I think it particularly, she had affection for writers. We could talk about that, but she also had affection for the people who they call the below the line people, the makeup and the hair and the people who did the lighting. And in return, because she had this natural appreciation for how hard they worked, they looked after her and took care of her. So it was a very positive. She used to say she felt this affection for the motion picture business. It was, when she talked about it and the people in it, it was a special family for her. And I think there are others who felt that way too. Many people.
Yeah, there are, unfortunately, sometimes only the stories that get to the news or what have you are the ones that had trouble with that.
That's right, because the people like to hear the scandals, and
right.
There was plenty to go around, but she skirted around all of that. She was very clever that way. She could stay away from trouble pretty well.
Yeah, that's great. To talk a little bit about your dad, we talked about Fay's drive and how much she did at such an early age, and so did he. He was a Broadway and movie producer at a very young age. And when he went to Hollywood in 1931, he went to work for Columbia. And I'm curious as to how he got along with Harry Cohn, because of course we hear all the stories about Harry Cohn.
Yeah, I think Harry Cohn was a bigger than life character with some pretty foul language and a tough guy and all of that, but he was a great impresario. He had good instincts, and he felt the most important persons on the lot were the writers, because he knew if he didn't have a good story, he didn't have a good movie. And that was not like MGM. MGM relied on stars, on movie stars, and then they had a kind of assembly line approach to writing, where somebody would do the story and somebody else would do the dialogue. And he understood that investing in great writers, that's why he brought a bunch of writers out from New York. Now, there were tension points, but over time, first of all, my father had grown up on the Lower East Side and in Brooklyn. So when Harry Cohn was rough, you know, rough and tough, my father just took it as a grain of salt and could tease him and push back. You know, at one point, they sort of played this trick on Harry Cohn where they collected money to buy the studio. And they were going to put the gate guard, Cap Duncan was the guy's name, in charge of the studio. And he got Harry Cohn to invest in this charitable cause. So they collected $300 and then they took it to a casino and put it on red and got 600 bucks. I mean, it was like everybody was having fun. They had fun teasing. There's a famous story about Joe Swirling, who was a terrific writer and my father's best friend. And Harry Cohn had this car he loved. It was a Rolls Royce. And Joe's wife was not a very good driver, and she backed into the Rolls Royce and smashed it. And Harry Cohn's yelling at Joe, you know, why did she do that? And Joe immediately said, well, probably because she thought you were in it, you know. So, I mean, that was the kind of banter that went on.
Yeah.
You have to understand that that was the whole picture. It wasn't just that he was a womanizer, but not, my mother worked there and he never came on to my mother, but he always kept her favorite perfume in his office. So, you know, so there was a sweet side to him too. And the big tragedy, I don't want to go down the road of Harry Cohn endlessly, but he wanted to have a child and his wife couldn't get pregnant. He even asked a young actress if she would get pregnant with him because he wanted a child so badly. And when my mother was pregnant, he sat in the room with her and cried. It was as if, you know, so there was this tender side to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to move on a little bit now to your dad's partnership with Frank Capra. So in 33 and 34, they teamed up together. They did Lady for a Day. They did It Happened One Night. And they were kind of catapulted then to the top tier of Hollywood. So I'm wondering, what was it that what was it that made it such a special team? I mean, they created so many, not just great films, but beloved films. What was it? What was that secret sauce, if you will? What was it about their relationship?
You know, I don't think either one of them was quite as good alone as they were together. First of all, my father's a great screenwriter, no question about that. But you can be a great screenwriter if someone can't translate that screenplay onto the film. And Capra had a great sense of timing. He was a wonderful, had good instincts about casting. He had a great team around him, good cinematographer, great cameraman. I mean, a sound man. I mean, he had a wonderful team, and he was very driven. And he had tried more serious films. He had a great sense of comedic timing. The thing that elevated it was my father's dialogue and story. And without that, Capra had nothing to film. And the remarkable thing is that they were very good friends and that they were politically so different. Right. So that would never happen today.
It would never happen today. Yeah, right.
Never happen today. So here's Capra, who's quite a lifelong conservative, never changed. And my father, who's a lifelong progressive. And somehow they wove their values together and they just knew what a good story was. And that's what drove it. So it was a magical partnership in many ways that ended up having challenges towards the end for outside reasons, I think, more than internal reasons. And they could tease each other and care about each other. And Capra had a great wife who added to the equation. And yeah, it was, they were very lucky to find each other. Very, very lucky.
Yeah.
It's so funny because, of course, I love all of their films. I mean, like I said, these aren't just great films, they're beloved. I mean, the message is incredible. One of my favorites is You Can't Take It With You. And I think when I was a little girl, I didn't understand it as much as an adult, right? Because I wasn't working like a dog every day.
Yeah.
You know, earning my keep, if you will. But as an adult, I just find it has one of the most wonderful messages. The scene with Lionel Barrymore and Jean Arthur when they're talking about her grandmother. I mean, that movie just resonates with me
You know,
beyond.
yeah, it's interesting. And some of the message in the film was not, of course, in the stage play. And there's that scene with the grandfather where he says he's challenging this whole idea of isms. You know, we follow isms.
Yeah.
The great people of American history didn't care about isms. You know, I mean, that I think at that time in American history, there was a lot of conflict about communism, socialism, um, conservative isms, you know, and that my father was really trying to break away from those boxes. So I think, you know, that's one of my favorite films too, but some of it is, of course, that
Yeah, a little crazy.
so charming, you know. There's
Right.
some
You know,
The message,
unbelievably charming
yeah,
scene.
perhaps,
the message
perhaps
about people over money.
Yeah, people.
right. I was going to say the reason that these movies were so great, of course, you know, these classic movies were not supposed to be seen so many times later. But the core values are important to everyone, regardless of political party. And that's how you know how successful he was at bringing forth these messages, you know, because they do, we could watch these movies. In fact, TCM just played It Happened One Night earlier today.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah.
They play it over and over again. And man, I think the messages that, and he had an ability to weave in the message without your feeling like you were
Right.
preached to.
Mhm.
And there's a scene in Meet John Doe where John Doe is saying, you know, we should tear down the walls that separate us. We need our neighbors. We need each other. Now, the country couldn't have been more divided at the time they made that film. It was before World War II, and it was the beginning of the anti-communist movement. And it was people many people in the United States who thought Hitler was just fine and Nazism wasn't so terrible, and that the big evil was Stalin. And people, there were witch hunts on all sides, and so that pained him a great deal that the country was so torn apart. But he didn't make a speech out of it. He just
Right,
he created this everyman character.
right.
And of course, it was hard to figure out how to end that movie.
Hmm.
I don't know if you recall, but he goes up to the top of the city hall to commit suicide. And I think it was hard to decide whether it would have been right for the character to commit suicide, but you can't have Gary Cooper commit suicide.
Right,
You know, it would just
right.
Well,
so they rescue him. And everybody.
there was a great line, and forgive me if I don't remember it, but something about if it's worth dying for, it's worth living for.
Yeah,
Am I right? Oh my gosh, what a line,
he
you
felt
know?
he when he made a film. My dad, when he made a film, the movie and the characters and the story stayed with him for months after, even for years. Even when he went off after Meet John Doe to go to Europe to try to do broadcasts back to the United States to say to American public, please, you know, get in, help the British. They're being bombed to death by Hitler. He talked about, you know, the courage of the British people, and they're just as courageous as Joe Chicago and Joe Seattle. You know, he saw the goodness in the average guy. This was so much in his DNA. It was not an. That's just how he was. And he was always looking to draw that out. And I think of him so many times today when I want to go to the middle of the country and say, wait a minute, we're not that different. Let's stop
Right.
this. Let's
Right.
stop this crazy.
Well, maybe if more people watched his movies more often, honestly, because that is the core value that it brings across, that every man really is every man, regardless of political affiliation.
That's right. That's right. We care about our kids. We care about
Right.
our community. We
Yeah.
care about being safe. We want to enjoy each other. We need each other. And every time there's a crisis, a big crisis, we come together and then we tear ourselves apart.
Right.
Let's not do that anymore.
Yeah.
So
So to just circle back a little bit, I love this conversation. I can probably talk on that topic alone for 2 hours. It happened one night, swept the Academy Awards in 1934. It's a movie, as we mentioned before, that people just don't get sick of watching. And I think anybody who hasn't seen it and watches it just wants to continue to take a look at it. Can you talk a little bit about the issues with casting? They had some problems with the casting, which I wasn't familiar with.
oh my goodness, they had a hard time cast. First of all, Columbia was a poverty row studio, so
Right.
none of the big names wanted to come and work for Harry Cohn at Columbia, and they had this big hit with "Lady for a Day" and a couple of other hits, but finally they really wanted Clark Gable. Well, Clark Gable was under contract at MGM, and MGM owed, they owed each other
Right.
favors.
Favorites.
It's like they were objects.
Yeah.
So to pay off Columbia, Mayer sent Clark Gable to do the picture, and it was a punishment. He was punishing Clark Gable for being too demanding about his salary. So Clark Gable didn't want to do the picture. About 4 women turned it down, including my father was dating Carol Lombard at the time, and she might have done it, but she was in another movie. So finally, my father went to Claudette Colbert and begged her to be in it. She said never. She didn't like she didn't like Frank Capra. She didn't want to go to Columbia. And he said for $30,000, and she said no. And he said for $40,000. She said no. And finally, he got on his knees and he said $50,000, and she said that'll be fine. She was a tough businesswoman, and that was way more money than I think Clark Gable got $10,000
Yeah.
picture.
I think I read that in your book, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody had faith in this movie. Everybody kept saying, all the crew kept saying, "Oh my God, I hope it's over soon." So no one saw the potential success in this little movie, and it's like a gem when you see it, right?
Oh, absolutely. And they all walked away with Oscars.
They did.
The first movie to win all the top 5 Oscars. And just quickly, part of the genius of my father wrote very specific, idiosyncratic supporting characters, and Capra cast them perfectly.
Yes.
And that's an example of how their collaboration was just.
Yep, Shapely. What a character. Yeah, wow, what a character. Also, Alan Hale Sr., what was his name? But my tonsils won't burn, but I forgot what his name was in the movie. Which I do want to say that, just for the heck of it, my memories go way back for It Happened One Night, because when I was a really little girl, that was it is to this day one of my mom's favorite movies. But when I was like, oh my gosh, probably knee high, she sat me down on the couch, we watched it together, and I'll just never forget it. It was one of those special memories, of watching the movie with my mom.
It's a magical film, and Claudette Colbert is beyond wonderful in it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. You can see that moment when she falls in love with him, or she knows she's in love with him when she's lying in the hay or whatever.
Yeah.
And she thinks that's not going to all happen. And oh my God, it's a melty moment. My heart melts for her. And anyway, there's just so many great scenes.
And I keep going back to your dad's dialogue. There's that whole thing about again, I can't remember it, but take me to that special island or that
Oh,
special, oh my gosh, it's
beautiful,
heartbreaking.
beautiful. Yeah,
And of course, the walls of Jericho was pretty funny.
Oh,
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
even how to dunk a donut.
oh yeah, and the piggyback thing,
Right, right.
great moments in that movie.
Yeah.
It's, I don't know, it's you can relate to it. It's real. It's I
And
mean, all
so
right, maybe the story we can't, we're not all runaway heiresses, but
much,
the people, right? You
yeah,
can believe these
Right,
people.
right.
and it's so much his personality.
Mhm.
It's the little Dunkin' Donuts thing, or the piggyback ride. I mean, he instead of it just being a piggyback ride, he's telling her she doesn't know a damn thing about piggybacking, and that nothing her father could have ever done. A rich man can't piggyback, you know, a, and it's all of that just marvelous kind of instinctive layering
It is.
in a package with a beautiful, yeah.
But to continue what you said about Claudette Colbert being one of the people who didn't believe in the film, I believe that when they were going to announce her Academy Award, she was on a train or something, or
Yes.
get on a
Or
train,
somewhere else.
and then they had to go get her because she won.
Well, that's probably true. And a lot of people boycotted that particularly Academy Awards ceremony because the entire motion picture industry of actors and directors and so on were at boycotting the Academy, because the Academy was part of the price fixing and the hyper control of the artists, and the studios in collaboration were requiring everyone to take pay cuts. It was a very tough time. So that was the context. So my father didn't go to the Academy Awards.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
I think we're going to segue now a little bit to your parents. And, we know from reading, or I learned from reading the book, that your dad was a ladies' man. Okay. So I see, he dated Carol Lombard, among others. Your mom, on the other hand, I think from what I remember, longed for a family, and it was something she really couldn't find maybe with her first husband, perhaps. But could you just tell us about how your parents met, a little bit about their fairy tale marriage, if you will?
Well, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm sorry, Vicky, to interrupt you, but to clarify, someone did write in the comments that you had mentioned Faye had a difficult marriage. It was not the marriage with your dad. So I just wanted to.
Thank you for fixing that. No, her first marriage, it was very, so it was, and as a result of a difficult first marriage, that she really worked hard to try to keep together, and he had alcohol problems and other problems. Uh, she really wanted to find someone that she could adore, and who would adore her. I mean, of course, that's what her big longing was. But she met my father at a party. Richard Barthelmess was a famous actor
Mhm.
in the olden days, silence and talkies. And he and his wife were great party givers. And so they had a Christmas Eve party where they invited everybody who was single. And my father had never married, and my mother was single. And so he kept his eye on her all night, and then finally screwed up the courage to go over and ask her if she would go see a film with him. And she said yes. And they went to see The Grapes of Wrath, which was not exactly a comedy, as you know. But I think he was very touched by my mother because she teared up during the film. She really identified with the struggles of the Ode family, Jode family. Um, but she was, and they went out for a little bit, but she was actually dating Clifford Odets at that time. So she had to tell him that she was going back to New York to be with Clifford Odets, and I think his heart was broken. And he went off to Europe, and then the war broke out of Pearl Harbor, and he came back through New York. She had by then broken up with Odets, and my father's best friend, Joe Swirling, and his wife said, "Bob, Faye is in New York and she would like to see you." And he said, well, are you sure? Are you sure she wants to see me? And they said, yes, she does really want to see you. And Odette's is in the past. And he called her and went racing over to her apartment. And that was it. They, they knew they had found the perfect other.
That's great.
So, yeah, that was, and from there, they had 12 years together. They were married for 12 years before he died. And my mother said to me once, I just, I felt I might not have him forever. And so she every day was devoted to what would make him happy, deep, deep happiness. And he had that same feeling about her. Now, all of that was also during a time they were having children, but for the first 4 years of their married life, the war was going on and he was in Europe and he was doing work for the government. So, but they felt they were in it together. So I think that that held them. But they had an extraordinary, really almost unlike any other relationship I've known of, marriage.
That's it's touching, and it's touching, in the book also. I was wondering, before we get to some of the questions in the chat, if you would read one of their letters for us.
Well, I think let me see. First of all, I have the book right here. And yes, I'll set the context a little bit for this. So now I've just described to you how they were, they got together in New York, right? And then she has to stay in New York and he takes the train back to Los Angeles because he has work to do on a Thin Man movie. And they really miss each other and they start writing to each other all the time. And finally, she gets a movie in Los Angeles and she can come out and they can be together. And he moves out of the hotel he's staying in, the Beverly Wilshire, where he has a series of rooms, and he gets a private house up and he completely redecorates the house before she comes, fills it with furniture. And they have 3 extraordinary, let me say, extraordinary weeks together, just deepening and deepening their relationship. And now she has to go back to New York, and he does not want her to go. And then he starts to write to her again. She's gone back to New York, and he says, darling, something's gone, and this is in the middle of the letter. He says, something's gone out of the house. It's terrible, darling. I'm beginning to lose my enthusiasm for it. It kept me alive only by some vague and inner hope that you were coming back to it. I move around in it aimlessly. I never go downstairs without peering in your room, expecting to hear you puttering about. And realizing you're not here, a dreadful, depressing feeling sweeps over me. Deeds misses you too. Deeds was the dog.
Oh.
Something's gone out of him too. It's intangible, but it's there. I tried to fill the void you left. I called up his sister-in-law, Katja. I called up Katja and asked her to send my bird back to me. Remember the canary I had? I don't suppose you do. Well, Katja cared for it while I was away. With you gone, there is no song in the house. I thought the canary might furnish it. Not yet, Angel, not yet. It refuses to sing. It peeps, but it does not sing. You could make her sing. You make my heart sing, as everything you touch sings. You see? Oh, goodness. Write to me. Tell me all. Tell me more than all. I miss you and long for you, Bob.
Ah,
That's
gee.
beautiful.
Now, it was very hard for me for a long time to read these letters,
Yeah, of course.
as you could see.
I have chills and my, wow,
That's beautiful.
that
Really
is beautiful. Thank you for reading that. Anyway, yeah, wow.
Up a few
Oh.
questions if anyone has any questions.
Yes, there are a few questions, if you have the time, Vicky.
Sure, and if you have the time, you too.
Or-
Yeah, I'm having a blast. You're just so lovely to talk to, really.
Yeah, oh my gosh, your stories are wonderful.
Yeah.
And the love that your parents shared is inspirational.
I have one here. It says, please ask Victoria, how did the loss of your father affect the Hollywood lifestyle you described as living? Did the community reach out to support your mother in her time of loss?
Well, that's a huge question because my father's illness started 5 years before he died. So it was a kind of incremental shifting away from this wonderful, playful life to, I say in the book, and it's quite true, that the day he fell ill from the stroke, I felt as someone had gone through the house and turned out all the lights. I never felt there was light in that house again because of, that's how I experienced the depression. There were many people who helped out, and in particular, I think like someone like Lou Wasserman, for example. My mother said, as because there was no insurance and there was no health care, everything, she was just having to pay for everything out of the family checkbook. And she went to Lou Wasserman and said, I think I need to go back to work. And he said, you'll start Monday, and he just put her to work. Irving Berlin and his wife were there all the time. Joe Swirling and his wife were there. They used to take me out on little outings, to help relieve my mother if she needed to be with my father and care for him at the convalescent home or wherever he was. So little by little, then she realized she had to sell the big house, and we moved into a smaller home. And but I never recall her feeling sorry for herself. And I think she did everything that she could, um, to put on the best face and to make our lives as, although we knew that she was underneath, what your parents are feeling. You don't have always have the right words for it. To, she wanted to give us a wonderful and good life. Um, and then there was family too. I had an aunt who, my mother's sister, and her, her brothers, everybody sort of pitched in. There was a lot of support. Frank Capra disappeared, and that's the thing that I couldn't ever quite understand. And I'm not even sure Frank Capra understood why he just disappeared. So I think my own guess is that it was painful for him, and he just couldn't quite get himself to come and see my father, who'd had the stroke, who'd been such a vibrant force. I think it was just hard, and he didn't know how to handle it.
Yeah.
Hmm. I'm looking here. I have a question here. Sorry, maybe this. Uh, so Paul is asking if you had to promote your father's work to a new generation, which of the incredible film scripts do you think best encapsulates your father's impressive talents? That's a wonderful way to put it.
Yeah, that's a lovely question. Well, I do think in many ways, It Happened One Night is kind of a perfect romantic comedy, but um, I think Meet John Doe has a lot of virtues to it, and I think Mr. Deeds also has a lot of writing virtues. So I don't think I could single one out. I I rather favor Mr. Deeds for its values and
Yeah.
its message.
Mhm.
I think Meet John Doe has a lot of wonderful writing, but I think it doesn't know. It goes from a romantic comedy and it becomes dark, and that's really what everybody was feeling in the country at that time. it doesn't quite know how to resolve itself.
That's true. That's a good way to put it. I have to rewatch that soon,
Mm.
because you gave me a lot to think about. Um,
I'm looking here, Aurora, I don't know where you are, but someone here is asking Jenny, the letter your mother wrote to King Kong expressing her gratitude and affection?
You're right. So she, my mother wrote an autobiography, and it's a wonderful read. And in it, she writes a letter to Kong, and she says, I'm not sure this letter is going to reach you because I don't know what your zip code is, and if there's a zip code on Skull Island. But the gist of the letter is, how much Kong has meant in her life. And then she tells why he's meant so much. And she just hopes that now that he's in retirement, that he appreciates her too, that's kind of
yeah.
the rest of it. And it's really a delightful, but it gives you a sense of her charm and wit.
Mhm.
And she was an exceptionally bright person with a good sense of humor, and that's a rare thing. The only person I know who reminds me of her is I worked with Eva Marie Saint,
Hmm.
and we became friends. And she has the same little bit sassy, but a little bit sassy sense of humor that my mother had. And I love that whenever Eva goes into her sassy sense of humor, I particularly love it. Yeah.
There are quite a few great questions. I'm wondering if maybe we need to do a second turn.
Well, I don't want to wear out my welcome here. I have to say that it fills my heart that people still love the films of the 30s and appreciate them. Um, those people who came to Hollywood built an extraordinary art form, entertainment form, and they should be heralded, and they continue to this very day. And if anything, maybe it's become too much of a business, but the things that I've been seeing, I've seen some films lately that I think are just amazing. And when I mentioned them to Anne Marie, she said, no, that's not my genre. But I think those early films set the stage for everything that came after. And it's just I
Just such a
love being
special time.
connected. And I don't know if we can do another one of these, but I would love to talk about Cary Grant, and maybe we could get Scott Hyman to talk
Yes.
about his book.
That'd be fabulous.
It's a great book about Cary Grant, and it
Yeah.
tells the true story of a man that we all swoon over, but was a layered and complicated character too. And my mother and Cary had a little, maybe they were going to get together, but didn't. Romance, romance from without it ever being really happening. But who wouldn't be in love with him? And there were so many of those great magical
him.
people. Yeah.
So this is great because we do have a lot of other questions, which I'm going to make note of. So maybe we should do this again and maybe branch out a little bit.
Well, let's branch out. I'd love to do that with you and drag in some other voices to talk about the old days of Hollywood. And I hope if people haven't read the book, I'm really grateful to the University of Kentucky Press for publishing the book. And they have a great list of books that are about film. When they approached me about publishing this book, I looked at their film list and that said, please send me every single thing that you have in your film list because they're all great.
They are.
It's kind of what Aurora and I said to them the other day.
I just got their upcoming Jane Russell book, so I'm going to start that this week, hopefully.
Really exciting. So I would love to do this again. I mean, Victoria, it's always a pleasure speaking with you.
Indeed.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
We have a good time, and you guys are the best.
Thank you.
Really are
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Thank you.
So
Thank
I
you.
hope you have a happy Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day to everybody out there. Thank you, everyone, for joining
Other
us.
loved ones from afar, even by Zoom. I hug everybody there on the
Virtual.
virtual hug.
Yeah.
And we will see you again soon.
Yes.
Great, that'd be
Thank you to everybody.
Thank you.